I would like to welcome everyone to I would like to welcome everyone to the International Union of Land Value Taxation Forum. Today we'll be presenting on the importance of GIS land value maps. My name is Wendy Rockwell. I am president of the International Union. Bill Batt, Dr. Bill Batt will be speaking. He is a retired university professor. He has served on the New York State Legislative Tax Study Commission until 1992. Now dedicates his time to research with special focus on the utility of land value maps and property tax affairs in New York. In 1962 to 1965, he served as one of the earliest Peace Corps volunteers in Thailand. Served on the board of the Robert Schachenbach Foundation, the Center for the Study of Economics, the Henry George School of New York, and is presently the deputy president of the International Union for Land Value Taxation and Free Trade. So welcome everyone. And if you have questions, please post them in chat, and we will be taking questions at the end from our participants. The presentation should be 45 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. This has been sponsored by the Council of Georgia's organizations, Better Cities, and the Earth Rights Institute. With no further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Bill Batt.
Well, thank you, Wendy and Alana. This presentation was made about 5 years ago for purposes of trying to persuade a department of New York State government, the Office of Information Technology, of the merits of land value maps. And I don't know how successful it was, but there are other places that are now using land value maps. So eventually New York State will come aboard. Many of the maps here were made by a fellow that I worked closely with. He's a retired state employee, later a GIS instructor at the State University in Albany, also an assessor, and most fortunately, also a geologist. Name is Bob Breglio. I should add that I decided after trying to do about 2 or 3 land value maps or GIS maps that it really wasn't worth my time, because I had to consult the manual once a month or however often I tried to do them. And I was very fortunate in finding Bob, who worked closely with me for about 15 years. So many of the maps that you see, especially the maps of New York State cities, are done by Bob Breglio. And I should add, lastly, that even though I don't do land value maps or any other kind of GIS myself, I am the first proponent of them. I think I've written papers on their merits, as well as talked with various audiences about how useful they can be, particularly to those of us who are proponents of land value taxation. So to continue on, I think we all understand that the property tax that is normally employed in the United States is really 2 different taxes with very different dynamics. It's a tax on the value of land and a tax on the value of buildings. Now, in the United States, most of the valuation is done so that it reflects the capitalized value of the parcels. In other countries, they frequently present it as the rental value, which in many cases is more useful. But right now, all the data that is compiled by the localities and the New York State government is the capitalized land value done by assessors. And as we'll see, often none too accurately. Now, a tax on the value of land is totally capitalized in its market price. In other words, because land is inelastic, see the vertical line S, if you add a tax on the land, it does not increase the total value of the parcel. What happens is that tax essentially reduces the market price and the tax remains the other part. So together, the tax and the market value are the nexus of what the price of the parcel is, the land parcel is. This is in contrast to a tax on a structure. And because the building or whatever the structure is has an elastic supply, some of that tax is passed forward to tenants or is passed backwards. Now, unfortunately, the assessors don't often understand this. So what they do is they simply arbitrarily put a value on the land component, and they're more interested in the land plus the building together because they're both taxed at the same rate. But if we were to eliminate the tax on the structure, we'd have a far more efficient tax. Now, if we look at any given parcel that has a structure on it, what is called improved parcel, we know that the house is typically a far greater value than the land when it's first built. And that's because it's worthwhile to build on parcels that have a relatively modest land value. On the other hand, over time, say at the life of the mortgage, the building value depreciates, whereas the land appreciates. So when we hear people say, oh yes, I bought my home for $100,000 and then 30 years later, I sold it for $300,000, it's not the building value that it reflects that difference. Some of it is inflation, but most of it is in the increase in the value of the land component. And that's what has to be understood here. Now, another important aspect of land has to do with what economists call the stock value or the flow value. Again, land has a flow value of what economists call rent. But most people don't understand it. They think that land is a thing just like a car, a computer, or a refrigerator, or anything else made by human beings. They think of it as a commodity. But in fact, the land has a flow value, much like a underground river flowing through a piece of land. It's a flow, like wind or radiation or a river current. And that's the reason why other countries frequently talk about the rental value rather than the capitalized value of a land parcel. Now, this happens to be a image of my city of Albany, New York. And one has to understand that typically the land in the center of the city is of far greater value than the parcels out at the periphery. When I owned a home, the land out where I lived was only about a 50th the value of the land down in the center of the city. And you can always know where the greatest land value is, because that's going to be where people ultimately build their buildings. And the profile, the skyline of a city reflects that land value as well as the building value. Now, this was first conceived of by a German economic geographer named Johann Heinrich von Thunen. He married wealth, and as a gentleman farmer, he had to decide how to use his land. And he calculated that the land way out at the edge of his property should be used for grazing land or forest, whereas closer in, he would plant his grain, and still closer in, he would have his vegetables and other commodities. And so that the land rent gradient reflected not only the use of the land, but the costs of bringing the commodities to market, the transportation costs. And you can tell by looking at this graphic that the land value in the center of a community or a city is going to be many, many times higher than the land value out at the periphery. That's really important to know, as you'll see by looking at the land value maps. Here's another representation of von Thunen's land rent curve, where the value of the land at the center of a community is so much higher than the land out at the edge. And this is a map of a GIS map long before GIS was easily done. And I wonder how this was done, but it reflects the same land value of the city of Salt Lake in 1969. That land value at the center of Salt Lake City is extremely valuable, and yet you go out to the edge and it has almost no value at all, no market value at least. And I don't know how this was done, but it was a very prescient representation way back before GIS ever existed. Here's another land value map showing the differential value of land of Portland. And one of the reasons it's useful is because Portland is one of the two cities in the United States that attempted to implement an urban growth boundary in order to discourage sprawl development. Well, that worked in one sense because it fostered development in the urban core within the boundary. But ultimately, that girdle had so much pressure that it burst, and the development continued outside the land value, outside the urban growth boundary, and sprawl continued to evolve. But the other problem with Portland is that the city can expand its boundaries so that if development occurs outside of what had been the urban growth boundary, they just continued to annex more land. And so, in a sense, that development is like a cat chasing its tail. The city becomes more larger and larger in square miles, but it continues the sprawl development. And here, and again, is an example of how the annexation in the city of Portland evolved. If we had land value taxation, it would foster development in the urban core and discourage the development in the outer areas. Here's a map by a fellow who is a very strong Georgist for decades. His name is Ted Gwartney, and Ted was hired as the assessor of Greenwich, Connecticut, which is really the Gold Coast of the state of Connecticut in the southwest corner, just by New York City. And it's hard to read the legend down in the corner, but the land value down near the Long Island seacoast there is worth as much as $1,300 a square foot. Very, very high value. And yet, if you go 5 miles in at the far end of the city of Greenwich, the land value falls to about $5 a square foot. So it shows beautifully the differential value between the urban area and the periphery. And here is Taipei, which is a city that does use land value taxation in part. And you can see by that map the differential value of the land in the city of Taipei. Here is a Boston map which shows how the land value is reflected in the transportation services. Those lines are the MTA, the Metro Transit Service serving Boston and the surrounding areas. And one can see that the development of the Metro has actually fostered development of land. It's gone to the point where the land value is even greater than what was reflected in this map about 10 years ago. Here's Philadelphia. This was done by the University of Pennsylvania, and it shows the differential value of land in downtown Philly as opposed to out at the edge. Here's Raleigh, North Carolina. Again, the differential value of the urban core versus the periphery. And one can see again that land value really reflects the capitalized value of access. And if you have a car or a home the cost of its construction or acquisition is the same no matter where you live, but the costs of transportation in the urban core are almost zilch. You can walk to work, whereas the cost of transportation out at the periphery are very high. And the reverse is true for the city. The city costs are high, but the periphery is modest. Here's New South Wales, again, showing the land value of the cities in New South Wales relative to the periphery. Land values per hectare. This was made years ago, and I've never been able to find out how it was done. This is the first land value map that I ever tried. It took me a month, and that's why I gave up and decided to rely on other people. This is Tompkins County, which is where the city of Ithaca and Cornell University exists. The land assessments were very good quality here, and that's one of the reasons I chose it. Besides, I spent 7 years in Ithaca while I taught at Binghamton. And the land value in the urban core is many times higher than the land value out where the dairy farms and the forests are. I unfortunately didn't put the range of the land value in the urban core, but the highest value parcel in downtown Ithaca was more than $1 million an acre. And yet, when people decided to settle and build a home, they frequently built out in the bucolic suburbs. And so the ratio of building value to land value showed a kind of a checkerboard, as if confetti was scattered all over the map. There was no reflection of the high value in the city as opposed to the low value out in the edge. And here's another city in upstate New York, Rochester, as you know, and naturally the white lines are the Genesee River and the highways, but there's a huge differential value between downtown and the periphery in Rochester, New York. Here's another city, Cohoes, a small city, one of 54 small cities in upstate New York. Here, the assessor didn't have a very good understanding of the land value. Otherwise, he would have understood that the land parcels proximate to one another would have roughly the same value per square foot or per acre. But even though he got it partially right, there's an awful lot of confusion about the differential value of land. And this is the value of land value maps. We're able to show where the assessors have done a good job in assessing the high value land and the peripheral land, because a good assessment would show all the high value parcels being one color. And as one went out to the periphery, the color would change perhaps from red, yellow, blue, green, so on. And yet here, without understanding the value of the land, the assessor didn't do a very good job. Another small city in upstate New York. And here's the city of Saratoga. much better, actually. He probably didn't do as good a job as he could have done had he understood land value maps, which would have helped him. But at least it shows the differential value between the urban city of Saratoga Springs and the periphery. I should add that when I've shown this to assessors, I get one of two reactions. Some assessors have been very grateful and have thanked me for giving them an added tool that will help them get accurate valuations. Other assessors have been very threatened because they recognize that it's really an embarrassment for the work that they've done. Here's again downtown Saratoga in greater detail. It's pretty good, actually, compared to what would have been the case if we actually had land value maps to help triangulate some of those parcels. Here's another city of Rome, New York. Again, quite good. It shows the value very clearly between downtown Rome and the periphery. And Elmira. Elmira is a small city way down in the southern tier, and the urban core reflects the higher assessed value. Again, all these maps reflect the assessor's estimate of what the market value is. If they had land value maps, they probably would have much better quality assessments and maps. Here's the city of Troy. Again, the downtown is high, very valuable. Going out to the edge along the Hudson River, the market value falls. And here's Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which does use land value taxation, as we have known for some 30 plus years. And the assessor is able to do a reasonably good job because we are only assessing the land here. I've been told that when we first made this map of Harrisburg, the mayor of the city, not Steve Reed, but the subsequent mayor, made a 6-foot high map and put it in the vestibule of City Hall so that everybody could actually see the differential value of the land parcels. And here's Cleveland, not the city itself, unfortunately. This is Cuyahoga County, and you can tell the different value. I suspect, I don't know Cleveland that well or the county, but obviously some of the suburbs of the county reflect development as opposed to probably scattered sprawl. I don't know. New London, Connecticut, here's an assessor who had no understanding of the differential value of buildings versus land value. He probably just took a percentage of the total parcel value, land and buildings together, and assigned a value to the land parcel. I don't know, but that is a shameful assessment. And there is my city of Albany, where the differential value of land and buildings is shown somewhat, but unfortunately, the area that is the derelict area that should actually have all of the building parcels written off as worthy of being raised they added some market value to those buildings. Whereas downtown, the red, where the Capitol buildings are, and the strips along the highways going out of the city are the highest land value. It's not bad, but it could be an awful lot better. And here again, it shows the mediocre quality of a land value map based on the assessor's data. This is a very interesting map done by the staff of the New York Federal Reserve Board, because what they did is take the record of sales of the arm's length sales of vacant land parcels throughout metropolitan New York and Jersey, and then calculated their value per square foot. And the downtown Manhattan area in the center had market values as high as $12,600 per square foot. Whereas if you go out to the edge of New Jersey, the land value per square foot falls to less than $2. And here, this is just taking the record of sales, arm's length sales. And I would love to see more work of this type. Now, here's a case where a guy with some technical ability decided to take the record of sales and triangulate them and make a map. This happens to be Nashville, Tennessee. And he didn't make individual parcel maps, but what he did show is the value of the total city of Nashville relative, taken lots of those parcels together. Now, here's a map made in 1904 by the British proponents of land value taxation. We know that the Brits had hoped to institute land value taxation at the beginning of the 20th century and made quite a bit of headway toward doing that. But then World War I came along and it became so difficult that they abandoned it. But at least this map shows the differential value of the various areas of the UK, the cities, London, for example, and Manchester, and so on. And I was fortunate in getting this map because someone offered it for sale on eBay. And it hopefully the Brits will try once again. Now with GIS, making land value maps is far easier because it's far less labor intensive. This must have been very, very expensive to do. Now the land value standards, the land value assessment standards as stipulated by the International Association of Assessment Officers, is for residential parcels, any parcel with a coefficient of dispersion of under 15%. That would be considered a good assessment. For commercial parcels, which change hands much less often, 20% is considered satisfactory. For vacant land parcels, also 20%. But if we had land value maps, we probably could improve on that substantially. Now, GIS has allowed us to make far better assessments of the land, at least. And most recently, just in the last month or two, we have now a map of the land value of all of the United States done by a fellow at Boston University. And this is something which is very revealing, because this map shows exactly the differential value between the cities throughout the country versus the peripheral areas. The blue, of course, is public land. The tan is Native American land, but you can see Chicago, New York, Washington, Philadelphia, and so on. That's where the land value is high. So when we talk about land value maps and somebody says, what about the farmers? Hey, if farmland isn't exempt for other reasons, we at least can show that it has very, very little market value relative to the sites in the urban core. The last thing I should mention is that when Henry George wrote Progress and Poverty, he argued that the value of the land taken together as a whole would be sufficient if the rental value were recovered to pay all the expenses of government for its goods and services, and probably even more. And that understanding was largely ignored until far more recently. And with computer power and available data, people like Joe Stiglitz, who's a proponent of land value taxation, has recognized that Henry George was correct, that a tax on the land is not only non-distortionary, but in an egalitarian society, we could optimally tax the land and raise just enough revenue to finance the level of government expenditures without recourse to taxation on income and sales. So this map, which just came out in this past month of November, it represents a real victory, because it shows how land value maps can really make a difference, not only in the accuracy of assessments, but also the differential value between one area of the country and another. And so that's as much as I have to say. I think it's worth my inviting questions or comments for anybody who has them.
Wendy speaking here. Do we have any land value maps of Germany now that they are, at least in one state, it's going to implement land value taxation within 5 years from now?
I haven't heard of any, Wendy. You're talking about the state of Baden-Württemberg. We're in the southwest corner of Germany, which is very strongly an industrial area. And I don't think it's the area, the Ruhr Valley, that's further north. I think we're talking about the area of Stuttgart. And I would hope that if they're going to implement land value taxation, they at least have good assessments, because otherwise what may happen is after it's implemented, some of the title holders of properties are going to question whether in fact their parcel is fairly assessed. We had an experience in New York State about 20 years ago when the city of Amsterdam tried to implement land value taxation. And after 1 year, the people rejected it because the assessments were so poor that people saw that it was unfair between one parcel and another. Now, we didn't have land value maps of Amsterdam. Had we had them, it would have been possible perhaps to rectify those bad assessments and to make clearer what the differential value between one site and another really was. And that's why the mayor of Harrisburg put their land value map up on the in City Hall, because people can see very transparently where the land value is high and where it's low, and where their particular parcel compares to that of their neighbor.
Yes, I see a very close connection between transparency and having these maps where the public can view them and understand them, and actually being able to implement a land value tax where it's demonstrated that the land value is not due to the owner per se, but due to population centers and also concentration of infrastructure that the population as a whole has paid for.
Absolutely. And there's a feedback between what the assessor does and what the GIS tech does. As I said, some of the assessors, when I showed them the land value maps, were very grateful, because then they said, oh, I can work with the GIS tech in another part of the mayor's office or wherever it was, and improve the quality of their assessment. And yet some were very threatened.
I had early on this term landlord. It's a common term, not unusual at all. But could we go a little deeper into the origination? If we want to tax the landlord, put the tax on the landlords, what does that mean? I mean, in terms of the origin of the landlord concept.
What does it mean to the landlord?
Now, what is a landlord? Well, this term
Landlord
lord.
Land what?
The term lord. We're not saying landowner, maybe, but the lord, the landlord.
Lord, L-O-R-D. Well, we're talking about the title holder. And the lord, the idea of landlord goes back to the medieval feudal fiefdoms, when at that time the tenants were the serfs, and the land titles were de facto held by the royalty. And that term continues to this day.
As does the collection of the land rent by the landlords. So historically, the landlord was the baron in a feudal system, and the serfs were at the bottom. They only had access through the permission, if you will, of the baron or the landlord. And now these common people, we only have access to a location by paying rent to a landlord or mortgage to a bank. So it would seem that historically it hasn't changed all that much. And our idea of taxing the land rent and the landlord, really, if you both can give your input on this, it's really a way of thinking of bringing democracy to an economic democracy to land, that this land rent created by the community, it's cycling, we're wanting to tax it back for the benefit of the community.
Yes, this reflects the view that in the United States, where some 65% of all households own their own home, it leads people into the belief that we're all speculators. People boast about the fact that they, quote, build equity in their home. That is, they bought a home for $100,000 30 years ago, and now when they sell it for, say, $300,000, and they say, my gosh, it's worthwhile to own a home. Now, when one considers the cost of living in it and the inflation and the maintenance, actually, the title to homes sometimes is arguably not that great a deal. It depends, especially when land values climb and then crash every 18 or so years, as has been shown. And furthermore, even if it turns out residential parcels out at the edge of municipalities have certain market value, most of the really, really valuable land is in the urban core. And that urban core is usually commercial buildings. And I pointed out the difference in value in New York City. If we had land value taxation in New York City, I have a feeling that the people who live out in Queens or the Bronx would pay so little, their taxes might actually go down. It's the huge value in downtown Manhattan that represents the real taxable revenue.
Which brought me to my second point from your show. It's pretty appalling and just surprising and shocking that in New York, a square foot of land could be worth as much as $12,000. $12,000 for a tiny square foot.
Per square foot, yes.
Yeah. Now, how much would we collect in ground rent if we had a land value tax on $12,000 per square foot on that square foot?
Well, that would depend on the rate, and that remains to be calculated. But let's assume that one parcel is a city block. That might be an acre. Gosh, an acre at $12,000 a square foot, and an acre is what, 43,000 square feet. Gosh, off the top of my head, I don't know what that would be. Yeah. But it would be millions.
So the square foot of $12,000, it really depends on the percentage,
right,
of that value that's going to be the land value tax percentage. So what is an optimum percentage? Many places it's considerably under 1% of a property tax. What would our optimum land value tax percentage be? Would it look like, what, 5% or more?
It could be about 5%, especially if we were to eliminate the income tax and sales tax and any other taxes that we now employ and used a land value tax instead, yeah, sure. As the Henry George theorem now is able to show, that there would be enough rental value to be taxed that we could easily finance cities, and we wouldn't have what economists call the deadweight loss of the kind of taxes that we presently employ. Deadweight loss or excess burden is a term used to describe the inefficiencies or loss of productivity due to the use of those taxes. And that deadweight loss can be, according to some of the people who have done this work, between 10 and 20% of the productivity of our society. We would, and of course, the tax on land value has no deadweight loss whatsoever. It's totally efficient.
So good points. Now, my last question or input, and then Wendy can take over and close this off. This incredible land value map of the United States, Bill, just freshly came out this month of November 2020. Those of us who advocate for community ground rent, land value tax policy, have wanted to know the statistics on how much would be the land rent for the United States. Now here we see an excellent land value map. Do you think it's feasible that we can now get our guesstimate, at least, of the land rent of the United States from this map?
Well, probably not from this map, but there are some people who have calculated the total land rent of the country. And I can't remember the fellow's name right now, but I think we have that data available. Now, one of our fellow Georgists, Win Achenbaum, emailed the creator, Christopher Nolte's, Professor Nolte's, and asked him what he used for data, and wondered how accurate the assessments that he used in creating this map. And he wrote back and said that he used many different databases, one of which was Zillow. Now, we know from some of our experience, and Win Achenbaum made this point, that Zillow may have lots of data, but it is in many cases not very accurate. So we're still in the process of refining the assessed value of the land. And I have no doubt that now with this technology that we can use, that we will be able to increase and refine the assessments. So it's based not just on sales records, market value, but also any number of other databases, rental value, for example, because many parcels never get sold. And we know in California, that is past Proposition 13, that some of those parcels haven't been sold in decades. And that's one of the reasons why an initiative was held this past year to try to at least get commercial parcels assessed at a different rate so that they're brought up to date. I don't know how that turned out. I think I read that that initiative lost, but the land values in California are totally out of whack.
This map is for land value, surface land value. And public land and Native American land are simply blue and tan. So let's be on the lookout also for maps that show the natural resource extraction coming out of our public and Native American lands, because there's also massive amounts of ground rent, resource rents that should be collected from that extraction. So let's look for such maps as well. So Bill, this has been really informative and enlightening and excellent. So I want to thank you so much for doing this forum for the International Union for Land Value Tax.
Well, happy to do it.
And I think that Wendy had to be elsewhere within this last minute or two. So just thank you so much again, Bill, and hopefully this recording can be nicely posted for others to view. Thank you. Have a good day.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.